I was on my way to an out-of-town job assignment, traveling alone by car. Along the way, I stopped at a popular and busy gas station and travel stop. Yes, it was a Busey's, to fuel up, stretch my legs, use the restroom, and grab a snack. It was bustling, the kind of place where you wouldn't expect anything unusual to happen. While I was standing near my car, a young woman approached me. She seemed to be in her mid-20s and had a developmental disability. She explained, with some distress, that her ride had abandoned her while she was in the restroom, leaving her stranded at the gas station. She didn't have a phone or know any numbers she could call for help. She was upset, and her story tugged at my heart. I wasn't sure what to do, so I checked with the store employees. They confirmed that she'd been there for over an hour, asking for help and looking for a ride. They mentioned that she kept telling them the same thing. Her friends had left her behind. I hesitated, but ultimately decided to do something I'd never done before: offer a stranger a ride. I wasn't heading to the exact town she needed to go to, but my route would take me partway there. I told her I could drop her off at a grocery store in the next town over, where I'd be turning off for my destination. It was a busy store, and I figured it'd be easier for her to find someone who could take her the rest of the way. Worst case, it'd only leave her about 5 miles from her destination instead of 25, a much more manageable distance to walk if she had to. She agreed to this plan, and we set off. But as soon as we hit the road, I noticed something strange. A van started following us. At first, I brushed it off as a coincidence, but as I tried to lose the van by switching lanes and taking different turns, it stayed right behind me, keeping pace no matter what. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Meanwhile, the woman in the passenger seat became distracted and kept reaching for my phone. She asked to play with it, and I firmly told her no. It wasn't a toy. It was for work. To avoid further distractions, I moved it out of her reach. The van suddenly sped up, edging closer to my car. Then, as we approached the outskirts of the business district in the next town, the woman abruptly announced that she remembered her boyfriend's phone number. She wanted to call him immediately. I explained that I couldn't use my phone while driving. This was before voice-activated features were common, and pointed out that there were no cell phone use while driving signs everywhere. I reassured her, "We're almost at the grocery store. We can call him from the parking lot." That's when her demeanor changed. Her voice grew loud and agitated as she yelled, "No! You have to take me home!" The tension in the car was thick, and the van behind us wasn't letting up. My instincts screamed that something wasn't right. "I told you, I can't do that. I'm not going to your town. It's in the opposite direction, and I need to get to my destination. We'll call your boyfriend from the parking lot." Her frustration boiled over. She grew visibly upset, raising her voice as she argued with me. Meanwhile, the van behind us crept closer, its presence growing more unnerving by the second. Finally, I pulled into the busy grocery store parking lot. It was around 4 p.m., and there were plenty of people coming and going. I parked near the entrance, hoping the activity would discourage any funny business. "Okay, what's your boyfriend's number?" I asked, trying to keep calm. She hesitated. I can't remember it." My heart sank. She wouldn't get out of the car and kept arguing with me. At the same time, the van pulled into the parking lot, parking at a distance, but still within sight. I spotted a sheriff's deputy parked nearby, a wave of relief washing over me. I rolled down my window and waved him over. He walked up to my car, his expression curious but calm. "What's going on here?" he asked. I quickly explained, keeping my voice steady. I picked her up at a travel stop. She needed a ride, but now she won't get out of my car. I lowered my voice and added, and that van has been following us the entire way. The deputy's demeanor shifted subtly, his gaze darting to the van before turning back to the woman. She brought you where you asked her to go, he said firmly to her. It's time for you to leave her car now. She hesitated, but eventually opened the door, stepping out slowly. I asked again for her boyfriend's number, but her response made my blood run cold. You're crazy. I don't have a boyfriend. Oh, look, there are my friends now. She pointed directly at the van. The deputy and I exchanged a knowing look. He leaned in slightly and said quietly, "Give me your contact information. I'll delay them for about 20 minutes while I check their license and registration and have a talk with them about abandoning a special needs adult. You get out of here, head to your destination, and I'll check in with you before my shift ends. And listen, don't pick up any more hitchhikers." I didn't need to be told twice. I left the parking lot as quickly as I could, heart pounding, and drove straight to my destination without stopping. Later, true to his word, the deputy called to ensure I'd arrived safely. He also mentioned they were keeping a close eye on the van and its owner. During my time on assignment, I spoke with 2 more deputies and a detective about the woman and the van. They asked a lot of questions but didn't share much information. Their intense interest in the situation only deepened my unease. To this day, I can't shake the fear that one day I'll turn on a true crime show and see a report about that woman and her friends. I dread hearing about them luring unsuspecting Good Samaritans into their trap, only to rob, or worse, harm them. In my early 20s, I was hitchhiking along the west coast of the United States. One evening, I found myself on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Wandering the area, I stumbled upon an overgrown section of a concrete canal, hidden and secluded enough to seem like a good spot to camp. Ignoring the risks of flash floods, a mistake I wouldn't recommend, I pitched my tent there and spent an uneventful night. The next morning, I left camp with a few heavier, replaceable items, dog food, canned goods, and headed into the city to busk. By the time I returned to my campsite, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. My tent was no longer where I'd left it. It now sat on the other side of the shallow, trickling stream in the canal. My stomach dropped. Had someone vandalized my camp or stolen my things? Heart pounding, I unzipped the tent, bracing myself for the worst. To my surprise, everything was exactly as I had left it, untouched and undisturbed. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was tired when I set up camp last night, I thought. Or maybe I came back from a different angle this evening. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the unease wouldn't go away. It was too late to find another spot, so I reluctantly moved the tent back across the stream to its original location. I curled up inside, my dog nestled on my lap, a knife clutched tightly in one hand. Whoever, or whatever, had moved my tent could come back. I needed to be ready. Sleep didn't come. Every little sound outside kept me on edge. To pass the time, I read by the dim light of a nearby street lamp, using the words on the page to distract myself from the uneasiness coiled tight in my chest. Hours slipped by, though I couldn't tell how many. Then, the night's oppressive silence was interrupted. It started as a faint sound, the rhythmic click-clack of claws against concrete. My pulse quickened, a wave of dread washing over me. Slowly, I tightened my grip on the knife and held my dog close, trying to keep her calm and quiet. The sound grew louder, closer. My heart raced as I listened carefully. It didn't sound like a person, it was just one creature. No accompanying footsteps, no human voice. Maybe it's just a stray animal, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. But the footsteps stopped directly across the stream from me. My breath caught as I listened to it sniffing and scratching at the ground. My instinct screamed to stay still, to stay hidden. But curiosity got the better of me. I shifted slowly, careful not to make a sound, and peered through the netting at the top of the tent. Through the faint light filtering through the tent, I saw it. A grotesque, ghastly creature standing where my tent had been. Its body was black, coated in patches of dust and dirt, with a barrel chest and a hunched back that gave it a malformed silhouette. Its feet seemed unnaturally large for its frame, which was spindly and gaunt. A thick mane of matted fur ran from its face down its back to where a tail should have been, though the rest of its skin clung tightly to its bones, almost skeletal. It couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds, maybe half the size of my dog, yet I was paralyzed with fear. Every instinct in my body screamed to stay hidden, to stay silent. I slowly lowered myself back down, heart pounding in my chest. Gripping my dog tightly, I clutched the knife, its blade steady despite the tremor in my hands. My ears strained to listen as the creature began pacing back and forth on the other side of the stream. It stopped intermittently, sniffing and scratching at the ground with increasing agitation. Its movements grew more erratic, its pace quickening as it began growling and snapping its jaws at the empty air. The sound was primal, wild, and utterly unnatural. I lay frozen, every nerve in my body alight with dread. My grip on the knife tightened as I braced for the worst, for the moment it might turn toward me. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling impossibly long. And then, without warning, the creature stopped. It stood still for a moment, silent and eerie. Then, as casually as if nothing had happened, it turned and began loping back down the canal in the same direction it had come. Even after it was gone, I couldn't bring myself to relax. Sleep was out of the question. I stayed curled in my tent, holding my dog close, the knife ready in my hand, until the first rays of sunlight broke the horizon. The moment the world began to lighten, I packed up my belongings as fast as I could. But before I left, curiosity tugged at me again. I crossed the stream to where the creature had stood and found the ground littered with deep, frenzied scratch marks. The sight sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I didn't linger. I packed up and left Los Angeles that day. I've never gone back. In all my years, I've never encountered anything like that creature again. I've faced countless animals in the wild, but nothing has ever inspired the raw, primal fear that thing did. Even now, I can't fully explain what happened that humid, dim-lit night in the canal, but I carry the memory with me still. A vivid, bone-deep reminder of what it felt like to be prey, to be watched, to feel the sharp, skittering hunger of something unnatural. This story took place nearly 10 years ago when I was 23. At the time, I was living in upstate New York with my ex-boyfriend and his family. It was a very rural area, far from the hustle and bustle I was used to growing up in the Bronx. He and I didn't have the healthiest relationship and argued frequently. One morning, before heading to work, we had one of our usual heated fights. He was 20 years older than me, but during this argument, he acted like a teenager. Jumping out of bed, he flipped me off and shouted, "If you don't like it so much, why don't you go back to the fucking Bronx?" That was all the motivation I needed. Furious, I grabbed my winter coat, slipped on my Uggs, stuffed my cigarettes into my pocket, and stormed out of the house. In my anger, I didn't even think to grab my phone. I didn't drive, so walking was my only option. I wasn't thinking clearly, just caught up in the drama of the moment. I wasn't really trying to make my way back to the Bronx, but I knew I needed to get as far away as I could, at least for a little while. Once I reached the entrance of the trailer park, I realized I had no idea where I was going. I had only lived there a few months and wasn't familiar with the area. Still, I turned left and started walking, figuring I'd eventually hit something resembling civilization. Before long, I found myself trudging alongside a busy road. 18-wheelers zoomed past, spraying me with slushy snow, soaking my shoes, and making the situation even more miserable. At one point, my boyfriend's car flew by on his way to work. Instead of stopping or turning around, he just sped up, clearly still stewing over our argument. I kept going, assuming he'd come back for me eventually. He didn't. I decided instead to try and find my best friend's mother's house. I knew it was somewhere in the same town, but my memory was fuzzy on the exact location. It started snowing harder, and my energy flagged as the cold seeped through my clothes. As I trudged on, I passed a VFW haul with a nondescript pickup truck parked in its lot. I didn't think much of it until I heard a voice call out, "Hey honey, do you need help?" My stomach twisted. I turned to see the truck's driver leaning out of his window. He was older, clean-cut, and average-looking. Gray hair, blue-green eyes, nothing overtly alarming. But my instincts told me to tread carefully. Still, I was cold, lost, and tired, and I didn't feel like I had many options. I approached the truck cautiously, keeping some distance as I weighed my choices. Desperation trumped hesitation, and I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" The moment the words left my mouth, I cringed. What a ridiculous question. He chuckled, shaking his head. I'm a good guy. I wouldn't tell you if I was a bad guy, would I?" The uneasy bells ringing in my head only grew louder, but against my better judgment, I got into the passenger seat. We started driving, and I quickly realized just how clueless I was. I didn't have an address, just the name of a road that stretched for miles. Hoping for some guidance, I asked to borrow his cell phone so I could call my best friend for directions. I dialed her number 3 times, but she didn't pick up. She didn't recognize the number. My anxiety deepened as I put the phone down, my sense of hopelessness growing by the second. After a few minutes of silence, he broke the ice with a casual question. "So, where are you from? And what are you doing out here in the middle of nowhere? In pajamas, no less." I explained I was from the Bronx and had stormed out after an argument with my boyfriend. He paused, then said, "Hey, you wouldn't be interested in making a little money, would you?" His tone sent a chill down my spine. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Oh, no thanks," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Well," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly, "I just figured since you said you were from the Bronx." He let the sentence hang ominously in the air, his words dripping with implication. My heart raced. My brain scrambled for a response that wouldn't provoke him further. "Oh, sure," I muttered weakly, hoping to keep things neutral. He laughed to himself, his chuckle dark and unsettling. Then, with a sneer, he mimicked me. Sure, she says. That was the moment I knew I had made a mistake. A big one. The panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I knew I couldn't let it show. My eyes darted to the passing landscape, desperately searching for any chance of escape. Snowbanks, a house, anything. But there was nothing. Just the vast, lonely road stretching on. My gut screamed that I was in serious danger. And then, as if by some miracle, Steve broke the silence. "Who are you going to see?" he asked. His voice casual, almost too casual. Clinging to a shred of hope, I quickly blurted out my best friend's mom's name and her husband's full name. His demeanor shifted immediately. "Oh, I know him," he said, his face lighting up. "We used to go snowmobiling together years ago." Relief flooded through me like a tidal wave. He knew them. He knew exactly where they lived. When we pulled up to the big yellow house, it felt like I'd been saved from the jaws of hell. My voice trembled as I asked his name. "Steve," he replied. He asked for mine, and I gave him a fake name without hesitation. I muttered a hasty, "Thank you," bolted from his truck, and ran to the porch as fast as I could. My hands fumbled with the door, but I finally crashed inside and locked it behind me. Shaking and crying, I stumbled through the house until I found my friend's mom, who had been roused from her sleep. One look at my face, and she didn't need to ask what was wrong. I poured out the story. How I'd fled my boyfriend, the terrifying encounter with Steve, and his unsettling proposition. She listened intently, her face a mixture of horror and concern. "You can't ever do something like that again," she said firmly. "Promise me you'll call me next time, no matter what." She also promised to talk to her husband about Steve to see what he knew. Later that day, I reluctantly returned to my boyfriend's house, trying to push the morning's events out of my mind. But the next day, my friend's mom called with news that froze my blood. Her husband confirmed Steve was bad news, a man he had cut ties with years ago. The last thing he'd heard was that Steve had been arrested for sexual assault. My friend's mom drove the point home. Steve could have hurt me, left me in some remote spot, and no one would have known where to look. It chilled me to think I might not have been found until spring when the snow melted. Later, she gave me Steve's last name. A quick online search brought me to a sex offender registry. His mugshot stared back at me, his cold, empty eyes a haunting reminder of how close I'd come to real danger. Her words have stayed with me ever since. "You must have some serious guardian angels looking out for you."